What do you think's on the horizon that you're seeing that you think is interesting? Gary Vee has this whole thing about attention arbitrage and being in the right spot as the next group of things come on. What's your take on that?
I think from a B2B marketing perspective, I think there's two really interesting things that I'm starting to see that I think more companies are going to be leaning into. And one we've been experimenting with is like connected TV or Mountain, actually having really quality B2B video and pumping it through almost like a streaming service, like a commercial. It's been super effective with the set of clients that we've been testing it on. The next thing is, I don't know if you saw this or you read about it, but I think ClickUp did this like really interesting in-person marketing stunt at Dreamforce where they built all these signs. They did like no Slack because they think ClickUp can kind of replace Slack. And they did this huge like protest or demonstration with hundreds of people at Dreamforce. And it garnered a ton of attention. So when we think about how are B2B companies being really creative and going back to some things in real life. This is how you get attention through these types of channels and through these types of things. So I think we're going to see more of that type of stuff.
Megan, thanks for joining us today. I was very excited about this when you agreed to do it because you and I have had a really, really interesting couple of years going back and forth and trading notes. We met through my wife, which you may not remember, and Jess knows all the smart people. And sure enough, you and I talked for the first time. We're like, wow. And I think it's really been fun to go back and forth and talk about we're in similar businesses, and we have another advantage, which I think is true for both of us. And one of the reasons why I think so much of what our conversations have found a very cogent, cohesive answer to the many questions that I have are that you were an operator in other areas before you became a marketer. And we think that's a really, really big deal. And so anyway, we're really thrilled to know that you could join us, and I'm looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I met your wife, Jess, even before I would consider myself a marketer. When I was chief operating officer at a company called ManagedbyQ, the CEO there, Dan Turan, introduced me to her. And she's amazing. Obviously, you know that. I kept in touch with her because she was just very much an unofficial mentor. And I was like, this lady is a badass. I want to stay in her sphere. And then when I teamed up with my business partner to start Refine Labs and basically became a marketer over the last 5 years, we reconnected, and you're running a business in the similar space. So she made the obvious connection, and it's been awesome getting to know you over the last couple of years, and yeah, trading notes and helping each other out where we can.
Yeah. Well, notwithstanding the fact that I think we both would be immodest to say we haven't done well in this, because you guys have done incredibly well, and we've done very, very well. We need to trade a lot of notes because it's changing so fast. You think about what has happened over the past 2 years, things that used to work great that don't work anymore. Maybe we could start there. Let's maybe talk a little bit about the way it used to be and what you're finding as you work with, B2B growth stage companies and larger. What was true before and now it just is not true at all anymore.
Yeah, the way I like to describe this is I almost like to go back to the 1990s. And I think you could, if you think from the 1990s until present day, I think you can identify 3 distinct eras that really reflected major shifts in how B2B buying and selling happened, with big implications then on how you should execute a B2B marketing strategy because of those shifts. So think about the 1990s, pre-internet. This was old school sales tactics. This is when, what you would probably call brand marketing was big, out of home, big conferences, big splash, big events. This was how business got done. This was how companies acquired customers. We then move into the 2000s, the internet's a thing, HubSpot starts. I'll give HubSpot some credit. They established this phrase called inbound, and they were really the initial proponent of what we know as SEO, the importance of your website as your sort of digital storefront. So we have that 1990s era. I almost call it like the analog era, like old school buying and selling. We then have what I would call like the website era. So this is where SEO, this is the initial digital marketing strategies were born, right? Google search, paid ads. This is when you would want to build really great content, rank in SEO. You could actually promote that content on the internet and get people to give you their email addresses. They were happy to do so, right? But you also started to see this shift where people were realizing, oh, I can do a good amount of research on my own. I don't need to talk to a salesperson right away. And there was this desire to go through a lot of the buying process on their own. We then have the pandemic, the rise of social media. The pandemic was a big catalyst that turned like the real world online overnight. And then you saw this insane shift in adoption of digital marketing strategies because it was essentially the only way for a period of time. And the other big change was because of social media, the way we engaged with the internet really changed. The way we learned about new things changed. And then because of the saturation of digital marketing strategies, you basically created a lot of cynicism and skepticism of, I don't want to give you my contact information for stuff. I can get 95% of the way through the buying cycle without ever talking to you. In fact, I actually want to talk to somebody I trust, not your salesperson, about whether your solution is going to work or not. So we're in what we kind of now, I would term the dark social era. And understanding that shift is really critical. And any smart company is looking at their strategy and saying, am I marketing to how people used to buy in the analog era or the website era? Or am I developing a go-to-market strategy that's aligned to what's happening today in reality? So that's the major shift that I think a lot of companies don't really acknowledge or recognize, or if they do, it's not reflected in their go-to-market strategy.
Well, it's, the problem of a lot of people who won the last war still running things. And by the way, some of that stuff works pretty well or well enough, and they don't necessarily want to invest in this next phase. Say more about the dark social. That's a fascinating line. It's not Darth Vader.
Yeah. So what dark social is meant to represent is the prevalence of how important peer-to-peer recommendations are, word of mouth, referrals, the fact that there are all these different communities on Slack, LinkedIn groups, et cetera, where people are asking other people about their experience with a product or a service and almost basing their purchasing decisions based on what they hear. Unfortunately, things like G2, people kind of know that that's a little pay to play. It's like, oh, people can pay to get a bunch of great reviews on their site. I actually want to talk to someone that I trust. So what dark social is representing is basically all of the marketing activities that are happening peer to peer in channels that really cannot be tracked. And so that's where the dark comes in, right? And so when you think about, okay, if this is the environment that I'm in, what can I do as a company to so that when someone is asking someone else, what product or service they should use for a particular problem, that my company is the one that they recommend and not one of my competitors. And so this goes back to what I would consider basic business fundamentals: having an amazing product or service, having an amazing customer experience, delivering on your promised outcome. And in terms of a marketing strategy, creating relevant and compelling content and distributing it where your audience already spends their time, aka social media, and positioning your company as a credible, trusted authority in whatever space that you're in.
Do you find, let's dig into that, because it's it's a fundamental question that I think everybody's struggling with right now, which is, how do you think about the relationship between paid content, organic content, and actually something that you and I've talked about recently more, which is some more advanced techniques to be able to do attribution associated with some of this dark social by using, much more advanced data science and analytics and a testing regime that allows you to sort of understand incremental improvement. But tell us a little bit, when you're talking to somebody, you come in and look at their business, how are you thinking about that relationship between paid and organic and then dark social, and what you could do to influence that?
Yeah. Ideally, everyone's strategy should have both an organic and paid social strategy that's included. Depending upon your company and your business economics, you should choose how much you're investing in both. When you think about it from an organic perspective, again, it goes back to really, I try to keep this stuff pretty simple. You're creating really great, relevant content that adds value to your audience and you're distributing it where they already spend their time. The challenge is when you do this only organically, you could create the best content in the world. But if you post it, for example, through your LinkedIn profile, and only 1% of your current followers are actually part of your total addressable market, then the people that you want to see the content are not seeing the content. So the challenge with an organic strategy alone is that it takes time to cultivate your followers and your connections to be your audience so that when you post organically, it has the desired intent. What I say for paid is until you build up your organic audience, you can pay for the pleasure to guarantee distribution through paid advertising. So depending upon your growth targets, how much you're willing to invest, you really should be doing both. But paid can absolutely accelerate getting your message to the right people to begin driving the results that you want.
Right. Well, and of course, Pesky LinkedIn actually wants a revenue model associated with us promoting our businesses, which, anyway, exactly. And what I think is really critical there too, one of the things that we've seen and like you've seen working not so much with startups, but for growth stage businesses, right? This ability to be able to take a company from 10 or 15 to 30 and then 50 and then beyond. A lot of the sort of growth hacking strategies, I put in quotes, sometimes it works, but it's a lot riskier because you're taking, they're like hacks or whatever. And there's something really, I find when we work with clients, that's really great. If you can, if you have a way to be able to make it repeatable and scalable, right, which is a critical part of enterprise value creation. One of the things that you and I have talked about, maybe we'll take a moment on this just to talk about a couple examples. One immutable law that we've seen is anything that is growing now and everything you're doing right now is going to stop working at some point. And so it is about the ability to be able to continue to improve, have the right infrastructure, the right teams and processes that allow you to continue to find that next leg, essentially. And one of the things I think you guys have done really well in our conversations, we talked about how to make this strategy work, is this is an enterprise value creating strategy, as opposed to we'll get 2 quarters out of it and then we got to figure out the next, or whatever. Then you have to hire the next agency or whatever. And so I think that's one area that you and I have, because we came from the operating side. I mean, that's how everybody gets paid, right? Investors get paid. Certainly all the operators like us, we're the last guys to get paid. So we really care about actually delivering that enterprise value. So let's talk a little bit about this strategy we're describing over time, and maybe some examples of where you saw people got stuck and then you were able to use this approach that you're describing to unlock it and get them going again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you made a couple of important points there. I think number one, just like your business needs to constantly be evolving to the changes in the market. So think about, how your product evolves and grows, how your service evolves and grows. You have to be having that same mindset with your go-to-market strategy as well. In terms of the strategy that we're talking about today, with essentially creating a thought leader at your company as almost like an evangelist who's sort of producing and distributing that content. What you see is pretty incredible compounding effects over time, the longer that it's being done. However, again, just like this strategy, the point of view, the unique point of view that you have, that also needs to be evolving, because things can get stale. The market can change so much that something that was relevant 5 years ago is no longer relevant. Your product could evolve, and therefore your perspective and your POV needs to evolve. So all of those dynamics are still true in this particular case. What's interesting, though, is if you're effective at cultivating 1 or 2 people at your company to really be seen as the true expert in the space and that people want to follow them and want to hear what they have to say, the brand equity just compounds over and over and over again. And if that person is adept at communicating the evolution of their POV, then you could keep that going, for a very long time. I know one customer that we worked with that's actually a very successful company. The company is called Clary. Their product has really evolved and changed over time. We worked with them when they were going through effectively like a category reset of their company. And they wanted to really spend some time claiming and owning the problem that they solved. And so they coined this term called revenue leak. And this was the problem. Companies have this revenue leak problem. The Clary platform can help identify the revenue leak so that you can fix it, right? And improve your predictable revenue engine. And so in partnering with them, one of the key goals that we had was, how do we make revenue leak stick in the market? How do we help Clary position and claim this problem with this term? And how do we push out advertisements that, yes, we have the Clary logo on the bottom, but it's actually more about owning the problem and communicating the problem effectively. This is, I think, a strategy that more and more companies need to adopt. A lot of companies, when you look at their advertisements, it's too company-focused, brand-focused, product-focused. And the most successful companies we see and that we work with over-index on marketing the problem. When you own the problem and, obviously own the solution to the problem, you become associated with being the expert in the space and perceived as wanting to help versus wanting to sell. So you have the same outcome, but it's taking a slightly different approach to what you actually do to get that desired effect.
Yeah. Well, this need actually ties back to what we were talking before about the fact that people, and this was even true when the IBM sales guys were walking around with their bag. They don't care about your product. They have a problem to solve. You're not solving their problem. I mean, that's, the oldest of the old in a way. So it's come around, as did all the early stuff in direct marketing, or direct mail, right? All of these same techniques come and they evolve.
Yeah. And this is, if I can interject, because I think this is where some people get it wrong, because if you go into LinkedIn land, the pervasive advice is build your personal brand, build your personal brand, talk about yourself. It's all about you. And that's not going to actually build a real business with meaningful enterprise value. Does that mean you could sell, $199 online courses? Sure. But that's not what most people want to do. And so when people think about adopting this strategy, it's not about the person that's the evangelist. It's about finding that someone who can communicate the problem and the point of view. And that's where people get it wrong. It's not just having a cool, charismatic leader that can just get, a bunch of followers on LinkedIn. That actually doesn't really convert to meaningful business outcomes. And so it's very easy to go down that path and think you're doing this right. In B2B, you don't want to be an influencer. You want to be a credible expert. You want to be a thought leader, right? And the key difference is it's not about you. It's about your customer. It's about their problems. And so that's where I feel like a lot of people get this wrong today.
So let's talk a little more about that. That's such a big idea, actually. And it's, by the way, it is a beautiful thing hiding in plain sight, because there's so much about the personal brand, and it's got to be a personality, and so say more about it, because I think it's a big deal, and it makes perfect sense to me. It comes back to a conversation you and I had about strategic narrative, right? And how it's such a powerful way to talk about what used to be true and what's true now, and making that distinction and where you fit. But tie those two ideas together, because that's a big thing. Because you're right, you can't swing a cat without hitting somebody who's talking about, you have to have the personal brand and how many how many followers, whatever. So say more.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what I think contributed to the success of our agency, Refine Labs. When you take a look at my business partner Chris's LinkedIn or my LinkedIn, it's not that we never ever have maybe a more personal post once in a while, but when you look at the content, all we're talking about are the problems in B2B marketing, the way B2B buying has changed, how we've actually in the last 4 years just moved from growth at all costs to profitable, efficient growth. All of the problems that this has created in businesses and how to think about solving those problems effectively. All of the content, all of the videos can be tied back to one component of our company's strategic narrative. And if you actually look at the content, we're saying the same 5 to 10 things over and over and over and over again in a slightly different way, right? And bringing new and fresh examples to sort of drive the point home. I only have, I have 30,000 plus followers on LinkedIn, but probably 60% of those followers are people that can buy my stuff, right? So, okay, someone else might have 150,000 followers, but the people that are following them are enjoying their fun personal content, but aren't even potential customers of what they want to sell, right? So what people don't connect the dots on is it's not about how many likes you get, how many followers. It's, are you being really strategic with clarifying what you want to communicate, communicating that in a meaningful, compelling way over and over and over again, and then making sure the people that need to see it are the people that are seeing it. And I think that's the people that focus on the personal brand might have, lots of likes and lots of followers, but not lots of business or customers as a result. And typically that's the missing piece. Is it's very different to go viral than to leverage this strategy to create consistent inbound that converts to paying customers.
When you think about, by the way, classic examples of something that's easier said than done, right? Because it actually requires a deep understanding of the product, and you have to have founders and executives who are capable of engaging at that level. Not that they're not capable, that you got to want to. You have to believe what you just said, and then you got to actually do it, and that's a meaningful amount of work. And by the way, when you're doing that work, no sales are coming in, right? Which is, I think, always that balance of like, well, wait a minute, let's get on with it a little bit. So when you guys run that process, how long does it generally take to get that worked out with someone? That first part.
Yeah, I think, and people say that, and it does, this organic strategy can take longer. But to be honest, if you execute it effectively within 3 months, you'll be getting inbound leads on LinkedIn. Within 6 months, you'll be having some amount of repeatability. And within a year, you will have clarity on what that funnel looks like. What can I expect in terms of inbounds? How many of those are going to convert to opportunities? How many of those can I close? So it doesn't take as long as people think. It is a lot of work. The hardest part is the unique point of view. That is the hardest part. And what's interesting is, I think one of the things I know that we talk about a lot is like, what's next? What's going to be next on the B2B marketing horizon? How are things going to continue to evolve? Some of the things that I'm seeing today that I'm most impressed by are companies that are using their own, and this is actually, I think, something that your company is very well positioned to do. Companies that have a really interesting proprietary data set, because of the work that they're doing with their customers, are able to see things at scale that many other people cannot, and derive really interesting and impactful insights, or identify the new emerging problems that are coming up that we're all going to have to figure out how to deal with together. The companies that are able to be really smart about using the data that they have with their customers to come to these conclusions, number one, not only will it help them serve their current customers better, number two, you can use those insights to position yourself as a leading thought leader in the market. And number four, that fuels what the evolution of your POV, your unique POV is. So it becomes this, I hate using cliche, like the flywheel or whatever, right? Of, how do I get customers, get their data? How do I help them? How do I learn insights? How do I communicate those insights so that I can get more customers that I can help and get more data, right? And so that's the beauty of what that can be. I think software companies, service companies, it can be lots of different type of companies. This is going to be, I think, the next frontier. There's a couple companies out there, Vendor, Hockey Stack, like newer software companies that are being really smart about this. And they're effectively positioning themselves as the expert, and it's working as a customer acquisition strategy very well.
Well, there's nothing like actually increasing revenue growth and improving unit economics to get your customers. I mean, it's, our company, Exactius, as starts with data for sure. I mean, but there's a lot of different ways to think about data in this space. One thing that we found again and again is that everybody's got data. I mean, it's everywhere. In fact, it's interesting. One of the things that we found is that the whole SaaS explosion, right? Everybody's got a lot of software. Everybody's got data all over the place. The question is whether or not two things that we find. One is because that software is often sold by department or function, it's siloed and they don't link together in a way that people can use to, particularly the CEO and the CFO and the board and the CMO. But the CFO ultimately is going to be like, am I getting return here? And can I follow what you're talking about? Is such a fundamental need. And because there's a proliferation of these systems, and people are using them to do their particular area better. But if it doesn't link together, it doesn't count in our view. It's particularly in light of where we are in the business cycle. If this is 22, didn't matter. I don't know. There's more money coming, right? But now every dollar's got to work. And it starts with data. And, the other thing that this is not a perfect metaphor, but it's a little bit like there are a lot of cars on the highway, or not even on the highway, in a windy road, basically driving along without headlights. Or the headlights are like, the alternator's not working, it's not working. The lights go out 50 feet. But I'll tell you, it really, really is handy to have them go out 300 feet so you can see the corner. And what we're finding again and again is if you dig into that, what they have today, and be able to add two things. One is that, does the CFO understand? Second is, can you dimensionalize in such a way where you can derive those insights? And then thirdly, really critically, you give the tools to the people who are actually turning the knobs, right? The operators, to use that data to make better decisions in their workflow, which is often also stopped. Like you're missing on the two sides. And so that we've seen has been a really, really critical part. Let's jump to something else, which I think actually, again, is associated with this very question, but is a really big topic for a lot of people, is attribution.
Yes.
And the challenges around attribution, which some of this, it's a data thing, but yeah. Tell me about how you guys think about attribution and how you're helping companies solve that today.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say is I don't believe that there's one attribution model that measures marketing perfectly. I don't think that you can measure marketing perfectly or go-to-market strategies perfectly. And I don't think that should be the goal. I think that the smartest companies out there, and what we talk about a lot, is what we'll term as hybrid attribution. We believe you should be looking at a lot of different data sources, depending upon the maturity of your business, to help you make good decisions. I also encourage everyone to add a dose of common sense to the mix as well, because it's very easy to manipulate data to really support any decision that you want. And so I think the way that we view it and the way that we think about it with our clients is let's be smart about the overall strategy, and let's use multiple data sources to help paint the best picture possible to make the best possible decisions relative to our investments. So I'll break down a couple of specifics there. And I feel like you guys at Exactius and Violet, you guys have, I think, even a more sophisticated way to look at it. So I'll kind of break down our current approach. And I think you have a lot of really interesting things to say about this topic with what the work that you guys are doing today. So there is still some benefit to what people would traditionally just call normal software-based attribution, whether that's HubSpot or Marketo or different attribution tools out there. For things like paid search, for example, It'll actually track relatively straightforward ROI for that particular channel, as long as you have all your conversion tracking set up. So cool. For that, it's straightforward. There's a clear linear path. That software is set up to track that path and can link to your full funnel. So for that particular channel, that tool can be effective at measuring ROI and how you want to think about adjusting your investments over time. When we go back to the dark social concept, and how do we think about capturing the things that can't be measured? How do we know that the podcast is working? How do we know that our thought leader posting on LinkedIn is working? We go back to the source. So we like to implement what we call self-reported attribution on our customers' primary conversion points, and ask your customer, how did you hear about us? Require the answer. Let them type it in. Do not provide a drop down. Now, everyone always asks me, well, they probably heard about you from a bunch of places. You might, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. But what we're getting is a data point on the thing that they remember. And it's not to say that everything else doesn't work, but that's super valuable if you start to get a huge set of responses that say podcast or LinkedIn or the Pavilion Slack community, whatever it happens to be. And it's not intended to say that you only look at self-reported attribution, but that's a really interesting way to collect data from your prospects and customers to begin to build a data set to show what is working and not working. There's a few other things that we can do, but it's definitely a tough topic. And I love the work that you guys are doing, because I think you've taken a really holistic and sophisticated approach on doing this in a way that also, which I think is so important, looks at the business outcome of the strategy, not just whether we get a certain volume of leads. And so I think you'll have a better answer to this than me. So I'd love for you to break that down for the listeners.
Well, it's funny. The thing that should be said, which is really, really important, everything you just described actually can be sufficient. And and that might be enough, actually, in many cases. And you guys have built a great business being able to take that approach to attribution. The question is, at some point, as you scale, it doesn't work as well, right? Because you got to add this next layer. But that's true for everything. I mean, I think the distinction of what we've seen at Exactly is because we've deployed Violet across so many companies that have grown for a long time, and we've added functionality to meet the challenges as they scale. All that stuff is now available. And you can see, we have, I had this thing once, which I think I told you, and it was really funny. We had a company like 2 or 3 companies ago where it got really big, and it was a really big success until it went sideways, and it just went sideways at the wrong moment, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. The bottom 3 deciles of our buyers, just their behavior changed, which is unusual. Like, usually it's very stable in particularly we had like 1.5 million customers. They just got weird, and we couldn't figure it out. It was driving us nuts. And David and I were working together at the time. I mean, like Ambien every night nuts. Like I couldn't figure. I was just, it was a disaster. And what you realize is that if you have a bad quarter at the wrong moment, it's done. Forget about marketing, sales, product, whatever. You got to make sure that you're ready for the next thing. And I think in this area in particular, because it crosses departments, crosses functions, it has a tendency, and in fact, the best executives, it's rare to have executives that go from startup all the way through to, forget about the evaluation. I'm talking revenue, like, a few $100 million in business. It's hard to find people who can do, because there are different skills along the way. But often people have experience up to a certain size, and they know how to do what they know how to do up to that moment. I remember, I don't know if you remember this too, but I've had a bunch of, as you know, I've started and built a lot of businesses. And a meaningful amount of and the biggest business I've ever run is a business I started. Okay. So, or rather that I worked in. And so, I mean, a meaningful amount of my time is like, I've never been here before. I have no idea. The world, I can tell things changed, but what do I do now? Right. And that actually, I think in attribution is a classic example, which is that if it works to a point, great. And if you can get your exit or you can get whatever, then it's the next guy's problem maybe. But if you're trying to build something over a long period of time, you have to continue to add this capability. And it's very similar to what you said. Actually, I think your comment about authenticity and starting with that core message, it has to be the foundation of everything. And all this other stuff follows from that. It's very true, I think, in data and attribution and all these things as well, which is that the data has to be clean and it has to be ready. They can be continually dimensionalized to answer the next set of questions. So there's a process and people and staffing and everything to allow you to do that. And then attribution is, I don't know, there's a roadmap. There's a bunch of things you're going to do over time that are well plumbed. I mean, people ahead of you know that. And we'll, on the podcast, we'll at some point, we're going to talk more about this one. But anyway, so let's jump on to another thing, which, I think is worth taking a moment on, given the fact that, again, everybody wants to know how it's going to play. Let's talk a little bit about AI and how it plays in some of these areas, particularly starting with content, because you have direct experience in that and so on. Tell us about your take on AI.
Yeah. I mean, even it's early days, but I feel like it's pretty obvious when people are using AI generated content or using AI to respond to content. And so I remember like maybe a year ago or maybe not quite that long, there was, the initial, oh my God, AI is going to take over all of our jobs. They can build all of our content. They can do all these things. We won't need people for them anymore. What I've seen and what the role that I think AI plays specifically in maybe content creation or different, marketing activities is augmenting the human. And so kind of you just reinforced this point that I made, and I'll say it again. Having a authentic, compelling, unique point of view is something that cannot be replicated by AI today. Maybe in the future, who knows how this technology will evolve. But that is what humans are really good at. And that is what distinguishes the great companies from the okay companies, the great marketers from the okay marketers, the great founders from the okay founders. Now, once you have that unique point of view, can you leverage AI to help make your content production and distribution system more efficient? Absolutely. It can be great for prompts. It can be great for first drafts, but you can't outsource the thoughts. The point of view, that is what actually matters. And that cannot be outsourced to a content agency or to an AI tool. Now, can AI help, post-produce your videos? Can AI help streamline different content development? Yeah, absolutely. And people should start using those tools for those means. But the incarnation of it today isn't replacing anything. It is just another tool. Now, again, who knows how it will evolve, and if maybe we have AI having their own original thoughts that are more impressive than humans, we'll probably have other problems to worry about besides marketing strategies at that point. But as it stands today, I see it just as another tool in the marketer's tool belt. And, the way we use it today is just to help with system and process efficiency, essentially.
Yeah. We have an AI tool within Violet, and what we did was very similar to what you're describing, which is if you're looking at data every day, it's a fair amount of work to dig through all these different things to try to find. So we automated a lot of that. So it increases time to insight and to questions. It's like, what the hell is happening over there? It's like, you can find that faster. It's not your third cup of coffee. It's like you wake up, there's an email there, and you're like, oh my God, I got to read this thing that describes what's going on. I can have one cup of coffee, but then I'm on my way, and I've gotten more time to really dig in. And that's actually been helpful because people can begin to see, and because a lot of this stuff, in all these jobs, there's a lot of repetition. Like there's a lot of stuff you got to do every day, every week, blah, blah, blah. And so we started there, and it's actually worked well. The rate of change is still extraordinary, obviously. And so we'll see what happens over the next, couple of years. But you're right. I think one of the things that I think has happened, and we've seen this with account-based selling, also because of what happened with COVID. People don't pick up the phone. They don't, they're not going to necessarily read their email. All of these strategies have this, starts to work. Everybody overdoes it because it's working, and then it starts to have a diminishing return, and the world changes again, and so on. Certainly happened in AI. You've seen these tools on the sales side where it's a super personalized note. When they first came out, incredible results, and the thing is just people have now can recognize it, and so a lot of this accelerating. I think one of the things that we've seen too is, the competition for attention is, and everybody's sleeping more or less the same amount. I mean, their waking hours are staying the same. The competition for attention is incredible, right? And cutting through. I mean, I'm 100% behind you. If it's not authentic and you're not a specific problem, it's not going to happen. But yeah, it's interesting.
And I think, one thing that I tell my customers too, or, potential customer on a sales conversation is marketing isn't going to solve a bad business or a bad product or a bad service. I very much think the world operates in cycles. And I think what's super interesting is the companies that are going to be winning tomorrow are really focused on solving a really important problem and delivering on that solution. We spoke a little bit about at the top of the call that, most of my experience actually is in customer success and focusing on sort of the customer experience. And so that function and sort of that philosophy and mindset is close to my heart. But for people that want to build really successful businesses, it's what are you actually solving? Does it matter? And is the solution that you're providing really solving the problem? When you layer on great marketing on that, then that's when you can really fuel the growth. There's a lot of SaaS companies out there, and it's been a rough couple of years. I think we are going to see another reckoning in the software space that's going to, probably consolidate a lot of players into whoever the market leader is. A lot will go out of business. My hope with some of the things like, technology advancements like AI is it allows us to focus on solving more important problems in the world and having those businesses become the next generation of important and lasting businesses. And so, I'm pretty direct on my sales calls. Like, if I learn from a business and I don't really think that we're going to be able to help them with better marketing,
totally.
It's like, polite. Hey,
you're always polite, like I am. It's like,
It's like
and I also notice you never refer them over to us, which we appreciate.
Yeah. Like, you have bigger problems in your marketing strategy. This is more existential than that.
But actually, and I'm sure you provide that feedback too in its way. I will tell you, it's really fascinating. This is a beautiful idea, and it's worth just taking a moment on, which is that to do that is so hard. There's just one example, there are 9,000 MarTech companies. 9,000. Or maybe it's 11,000. I mean, some number. It's much, much bigger than anybody's ever, and it's divided in a million different ways, and it's very hard to tell the difference. So it is so hard to get that right. The other thing that I think has happened, and you and I have seen this, is that the marketing side of it, right, and there's a lot of pieces to that, has gotten so technical and so complex, and it's changing so fast that, one thing that we recommend is make sure you understand where you're generating enterprise value, strategic enterprise value, and where you should just get somebody else to do it if they're experts in it. I think we actually think that it's a balance too, because, finding the right outside source of help is challenging because it's often an alignment problem, right? If you design the game wrong for those people, it can create a management task where they're delivering on what you've incented them to do, but it's hard to tie it to the whole enterprise value equation. At the same time, building these teams in-house and having them stay up to speed is really hard too. And so, a critical part for executives is trying to think through, how do I balance that, and where should I really put my dollars? I'll tell you, we don't do brand, and we also do product, and but those components, and brand in the context of the product marketing brand, right, which is to your point, they're really hard to do well, man. Whew.
Yeah. And, I think going back to the top of the call, we were talking a little bit about, the analog buying era, the website buying era, the dark social buying era, where I've been seeing the opportunity for our agency, Refine Labs, to help companies is companies that are actually already 100 million plus. These companies are huge. They have thousands of employees. You kind of touched on this earlier in the conversation. Making change at these organizations is nearly impossible with the amount of bureaucracy and people that exist to effectively get the alignment needed and go through the change management process. These are the companies that are still deploying analog and website era strategies, yet they're actually relatively successful and still probably growing at 10 to 20% a year because they sort of work well enough. This is the segment that I'm trying to reach, because I'm like, you are in for a reckoning. It's working well enough now. Your relative success is keeping you blind to the fact that you are not acting now to make these changes to your go-to-market strategy that are absolutely needed. These companies have the resources, but the sheer act of the change management required to make that happen is so difficult. Many of them don't even realize it's a problem. And the ones that do are overwhelmed with the prospect of how to actually execute it effectively. Those are the companies that I'm trying to reach right now. Like, they've already created so much enterprise value, and they have this window that they need to capitalize on to make the change effectively. We're well positioned to go in and help a really successful company make this change so that they can be even more successful. But that's a really interesting dynamic I've been thinking a lot about, because it will come to bite them if they don't make change soon enough.
100%. And the other side to that is that the difference between companies of that size growing 10 to 20% a year and companies are growing 40% a year in terms of enterprise value is 5x revenue. I don't know. It's a lot, right? So it's a half a $1 billion market cap opportunity. And by the way, if they're not growing at all and they start to decline, maybe there's another 250 on the other side of that. So there might be, there's close to $1 billion of market cap for a $100 million business in getting this right. And it's a data problem, actually. It's what you guys do for a living problem. But the stakes couldn't be higher. And what we find interesting when we talk to companies that size, we work with companies 100 million plus. We have $600 million clients as well. Is you're exactly right. It's a combination of, they have all kinds of great resources, and they've been by definition very successful. Like, that's really hard to do. Really hard to do. And they're competent, capable people in those roles who are running playbooks that have worked. And and by the way, that's not a small thing. Like, it's working. But adding on is a very big part of it. And I think what we found helpful as we talk to it is really almost abstracting away a lot of the tactics and a lot of stuff we're talking about. It's really just getting into what generates enterprise value, and what working back from, here's the revenue growth I need, here's my net revenue retention I need, and so on. Like, what are the components of the strategy that could have a chance to do that, and engaging the rest of the functional leaders in those companies to talk about maybe some things you could do, and that's worked better. It's funny. We're in the marketing, both of us ostensibly do stuff in the marketing world. But in a lot of ways, I guess in the Mad Men days, it was very glamorous. These days, I think it's a little bit of the stepchild, because it's, again, coming back to attribution and so on. You're like, and I think partly because it's hard to explain. It's so complicated. It's a lot of pieces, a lot of complicated. Like, it's not like, hey, here are the 3 things you got to do. Right? It's like, well, I don't know. There's a shit ton to do, and here are the top things, but all of this other stuff that has to happen. and it's cross-functional and so on. So it's a fun problem. The good news about this, and one of the things that I think is really great here, is there's a mission in it. Enterprise value creation and destruction, as it relates to what you and I do every day, is dramatic. Not to denigrate customer success, it's like a critical component. But if you get the wrong thing going when you're at that size, I mean, you're talking about an enormous amount of money in terms of bottom line, top line. You can have a relatively small amount of people having a huge impact on your business. So it's an important one. All right. What are you reading today?
Well, so I can tell you what I'm reading now, and I think it's not going to be what you expect. You ready for a fun answer? I've been studying this really interesting philosophy called transurfing, and it's all about manifesting your reality. You might think I'm a little crazy, but I've been following these daily practices for the last 30 days. And it's been pretty interesting to see how a shift in mindset and the application of some of these sort of daily practices within this philosophy can be very powerful to driving real change in the reality that you have. And so it's in fact, even with my business, had a little bit of like a summer slump in sales, and have been communicating how I have no doubt I'll hit my financial plan for the year, and have literally brought in 5 deals in the last 3 weeks. And so it's super fun and interesting, and I'm applying it to both my personal life and my business life. And maybe I'm reading into it, or maybe it's working. I don't know.
Well, I think the proof's in the pudding. Transurfing. Okay, good.
Check it out.
So, last question. Let's talk a little bit about the future. What do you think's coming? Some new things on the horizon, LinkedIn Shorts, variety of different types of things. What do you think's it? Notwithstanding, we have to get the authentic part right, but if we get that part right, what do you think's on the horizon that you're seeing that you think is interesting? Gary Vee has this whole thing about attention arbitrage and being in the right spot as the next group of things come on. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think from a B2B marketing perspective, I think there's 2 really interesting things that I'm starting to see that I think more companies are going to be leaning into. And one we've been experimenting with is like connected TV or Mountain, actually having really quality B2B video and pumping it through almost like a streaming service, like a commercial, right? And so that's traditionally been very B2C heavy. And obviously can be used by any B2C company, but really high quality video production and using that channel as a way to get the word out. It's been super effective with the set of clients that we've been testing it on. And it's kind of like B2B catching up with B2C, which is like a typical thing that we see. The next thing is, I don't know if you saw this or you read about it, but I think ClickUp did this like really interesting in-person marketing stunt at Dreamforce, where they built all these signs that was like, how Benioff did the no software. They did like no Slack because they think ClickUp can kind of replace Slack. And they did this huge like protest or demonstration with hundreds of people at Dreamforce. And it garnered a ton of attention. So when we think about how like the pandemic is behind us, how are B2B companies being really creative and going back to some things in real life? Is it out of home? Is it, different events? Is it these types of stunts that really make people remember you and are unexpected for the B2B kind of marketing world? And so like, this is how, as we move into this attention economy, this is how you get attention, right? Through these types of channels and through these types of things. So I think we're going to see more of that type of stuff.
Great. Oh my God. I wish we had 4 hours, but we have to get like...
We can do it again. We'll do a part 2 one day.
We should do part 2. Oh my God. Yeah. Can you do part 2? I didn't know that was the thing.
Sign me up. Yeah, you can definitely do that. Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. Bring your best podcast guests back. That's one of our main moves.
Great, I love it. What are you doing next Tuesday? No, like Megan, thank you so much. As always, a delight. And
Great conversation.
yeah, we're going to have you back.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, buddy.
Thanks for having me.